Welcome to Mr. Sleepless Horror. Let's listen to horror stories to fall asleep with gentle rain sounds. I remember the morning it happened, a cold gray stretch of highway cutting through the plains of Kansas. The kind of place where the wind never stops scraping against the side of the truck. I had been driving since before dawn, the sky still heavy with the last shapes of night. Something about that morning felt off, like the air was withholding something from me, waiting for the right moment to reveal whatever it was hiding beneath its calm surface. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after weeks on the road, but deep down I knew it was more than that. I could feel it crawling under my skin with every passing mile. The load I was hauling was routine, just pallets of packaged flooring, headed to a warehouse outside Denver. Nothing special, nothing worth remembering, and definitely nothing worth fearing. But the company insisted on this particular route due to some construction farther south. So I followed orders and stayed on the long empty stretch of US 36, a highway so quiet it often felt abandoned. Every few miles I would pass a faded sign or an old barn leaning toward collapse, reminders of a place time had left behind. I kept the radio off because the static annoyed me, leaving only the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose chains in the back to fill the silence. Around mid-morning, I noticed the first thing that truly bothered me. A dark pickup appeared behind me, keeping its distance but never falling back. I checked my mirrors again and again, convinced I was imagining it, but it stayed there like a shadow stitched to the road. I slowed down, then sped up, hoping it would pass or turn off at the next intersection, but it didn't. It matched my pace perfectly, floating just far enough behind that I couldn't make out the driver. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just another traveler with nowhere else to be, but the longer it lingered, the more uneasy I became. The pressure of being watched tightened around my chest until every breath felt heavy. By noon the wind had picked up, pushing the trailer sideways just enough to keep me tense. I gripped the wheel harder than I needed to, the muscles in my arms tightening with each gust. The pickup was still behind me, unwavering, steady, like it was tethered to my bumper by something I couldn't see. When I finally reached a small gas station near a town barely big enough for a single streetlight, I pulled in, desperate to shake the feeling of being hunted. The pickup slowed as it approached the entrance, and for a moment I thought the driver would pull in behind me. Instead, it rolled past the station, continuing down the road until it vanished into the shimmering heat ahead. The relief washed over me so fast it left me dizzy. Inside the station I grabbed a coffee, though the bitter smell of it made my stomach twist. The cashier barely looked up, more focused on a newspaper than the lone trucker who had wandered in from the highway. I lingered longer than I needed to, pretending to read the labels on overpriced snacks while trying to steady my nerves. When I finally stepped back outside, the quiet hit me like a weight. No cars, no wind, no movement at all. Just my truck waiting exactly where I left it. I climbed back into the cab and sat there with the engine idling, letting the cold air from the vents settle my shaking hands. I drove for another hour before the pickup reappeared. This time it was farther back, just a speck in the mirror, but unmistakable. My pulse thudded in my ears. Every instinct in me screamed to pull over, to confront whoever was inside, but the fear of what I might find kept me moving. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, but the longer it followed, the less believable that became. I tried to call dispatch to tell them something wasn't right, but the signal was non-existent. The bars on my phone flickered for a moment, then disappeared entirely. I tossed it onto the passenger seat, my throat tight with frustration. The sun was beginning to set when I reached the edge of a narrow canyon. The road cut through it like a slit, tall rock walls rising on both sides. I hated this stretch of highway. The blind curves and sudden shadows made me feel boxed in, like the world was closing around me. As I eased into the canyon, I checked the mirror again. The pickup was still there, the fading light painting it in long, thin streaks of orange. I focused on the road, trying to ignore the dread creeping up my spine. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold air pouring into the cab. Halfway through the canyon, I heard a sharp metallic bang from the trailer. It wasn't the usual rattle of chains. It was louder, heavier, like something had slammed against the inside wall. I knew I had secured everything tightly, triple-checking the straps before I left the yard. Another bang echoed through the cab, followed by a low scraping sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled onto the narrow shoulder, the tires crunching against gravel. The canyon walls pressed in around me, trapping the last light of day above in a thin strip. I stepped out cautiously, the air colder than before. The sound of my boots against the pavement echoed in the confined space. I walked along the length of the trailer, running my hand across the metal as if expecting it to be warm from the force of whatever hit it. When I reached the back, everything looked normal. The lock was intact, the seal unbroken. I hesitated before opening the door, every instinct warning me not to. But I had to check. I swung the door upward and grabbed a flashlight from the side compartment. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. The pallets were secure, the straps tight, nothing shifted. No sign of damage. No explanation for the noise. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold, stale air. When I finally backed out and lowered the door, the canyon felt even quieter than before. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how alone you really are. I walked back toward the cab, my nerves frayed, my mind racing with possibilities I couldn't piece together. That was when I noticed the pickup had stopped about 100 yards behind me. Its headlights were off. Its engine was silent. It just sat there in the middle of the road, a dark shape against the fading light. I froze, the breath leaving my body in a thin cloud. Whoever was inside wasn't moving. They were just watching me. I climbed back into the truck, my hands trembling as I slammed the door shut. I locked it even though it felt pointless. The engine roared to life, the sound echoing through the canyon. I pulled back onto the road, refusing to look in the mirror, even though I could feel the heaviness of those unseen eyes tracking every movement. For several long minutes I drove in complete silence, waiting for the pickup to follow. When I finally forced myself to check the mirror, it was gone. I should have felt relieved, but the fear only grew. I kept expecting to see it appear around every curve, lurking in every shadow. By the time I reached the end of the canyon, my nerves were stretched thin enough to snap. The sky had turned to deep indigo, the first stars blinking to life. I drove until I reached a rest area, the kind with a few picnic tables and a single dim light flickering above a cracked sidewalk. Story 1. The Way Station. I've been driving trucks for 17 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road. Dead animals that shouldn't exist in certain states. Cars abandoned in positions that make no sense. People walking along highways at 3 in the morning, miles from anywhere. But nothing prepared me for what happened at the Way Station outside of Barstow, California. It was late August, and the heat was murderous. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Phoenix to Sacramento, running behind schedule because of construction delays. My dispatcher had been calling every hour, pressuring me to make up time. I was exhausted, surviving on gas station coffee and those little caffeine pills that make your heart race. The sun was setting when I saw the Way Station sign. I groaned because stops meant more delays, but you don't skip way stations. The fines aren't worth it, and I had a clean record I wanted to keep. I pulled into the right lane and followed the ramp up to the facility. That's when I noticed something odd. The parking lot was completely empty. No other trucks. No cars. The building itself looked operational, lights on inside, but there wasn't a single vehicle anywhere. In 17 years, I'd never seen an active way station that deserted. I considered just rolling through, but the scales were activated. The light was green, signaling me to proceed. I pulled onto the scale platform and waited. The display should have shown my weight immediately, but it just flickered with random numbers. 84,000 pounds, then 12,000, then 156,000. The numbers made no sense. Through my driver's side mirror, I watched the building. The windows were too bright, like the lights inside were industrial strength. I couldn't see anyone moving around in there. The whole place had this stillness to it that made my skin crawl. After 5 minutes of waiting, I decided to go inside. I set the brake and climbed down from the cab. The air was still and hot, and the only sound was the hum of the building's air conditioning unit. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked toward the entrance. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, expecting to see someone at the desk. The front room was empty. Computer monitors glowed on the counter, displaying what looked like normal way station software. There was a half-eaten sandwich on a paper plate, a coffee mug still steaming. "Hello," I called out. "Anyone here?" Nothing. Just the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I walked around the counter and looked down the hallway that led to the back offices. The lights were on there too, but I couldn't see any movement. Every instinct in my body was telling me to leave, to get back in my truck and go, but I needed clearance to proceed legally. That's when I heard it, a sound coming from one of the back rooms. Not voices exactly, more like breathing, heavy rhythmic breathing, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too slow, like something massive was sleeping back there. I took a few steps down the hallway. The breathing got louder. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my mouth had gone completely dry. I reached the first door on the left and pressed my ear against it. The breathing was coming from inside, along with another sound I couldn't identify. A wet, sliding sound, like something being dragged through liquid. I should have left right then. I know that now. But curiosity and confusion pushed me forward. I turned the handle and opened the door. The room was dark except for the light from the hallway. I could make out shapes inside. Filing cabinets, a desk, and something else. Something large in the corner, moving slightly. The breathing was coming from there. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. The corner was empty. Nothing there at all. But the breathing continued, and I realized with a shock that it was coming from the walls themselves. The sound was emanating from inside the walls, behind the drywall. Not just one source, but multiple points throughout the room. I backed out quickly and returned to the front area. My hands were shaking. I looked at the monitors again and noticed something I'd missed before. The screens weren't showing normal way station data. They were displaying video feeds, but not from security cameras. These were interior shots of truck cabs, dozens of them. Different trucks, different drivers, all parked at scales. All of them empty. The driver's seats vacant, doors hanging open. One of the feeds showed my own truck. I could see it clearly on the screen, parked outside on the scale. The camera angle was wrong though, too high to be from any normal security camera. It was looking down at my truck from directly above, as if something was hovering over it. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. Out the door, across the gravel, stumbling in my panic. I reached my truck and hauled myself up into the cab. My hands fumbled with the keys as I started the engine. The scale light was still green, but I didn't care anymore. I released the brake and pressed the accelerator. As I pulled away, I looked in my side mirror at the building. Someone was standing in the doorway now. A figure in what looked like a uniform, watching me leave. They were too far away to see clearly, but something about their proportions was wrong. Their arms were too long, hanging down past their knees. And they were impossibly tall, having to hunch over to fit in the doorway. The figure raised one of those long arms and waved at me. Not a friendly wave. A slow, deliberate gesture, like they were saying goodbye. Or see you soon. I drove for 6 hours straight after that. Didn't stop until I was in Sacramento. I reported the incident to my dispatcher, told him the way station was unmanned and the equipment was malfunctioning. He said he'd file a report with the state. 2 weeks later, I had to make the same run. Same route. Same time of day. I dreaded passing that way station, but when I got there it was gone. Not abandoned. Not closed. Gone. Just an empty lot where the building had been, with no sign that anything had ever stood there. I asked other drivers about it. None of them remembered a way station at that location. I searched online, looked at maps, even filed a Freedom of Information request with the California Department of Transportation. According to every record I could find, there has never been a way station outside of Barstow at that mile marker. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through California, I catch myself checking the mirrors, looking for that figure with the too long arms. Wondering if they're still out there, still waiting at that impossible place that doesn't exist. Still waving goodbye. I picked up a hitchhiker once. Just once. I know every trucker says never do it, and I'd followed that rule for 12 years without breaking it. But on this particular night in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, I made an exception that I regret every single day. It was February, and the cold was the kind that kills. I'm talking 20 below zero, wind chill making it feel like 40 below. The kind of cold where your breath freezes in your nostrils and exposed skin gets frostbite in minutes. I was hauling equipment from Denver to Billings, running through the night to avoid daytime traffic. The highway was empty. Just me, the darkness, and endless stretches of nothing. My headlights cut through the black, illuminating the snow-covered road and not much else. I'd been driving for 6 hours, staying alert on coffee and beef jerky, when I saw him standing on the shoulder. He was waving both arms over his head, the universal signal for help. He wore jeans and a light jacket, completely inadequate for the weather. No car was visible anywhere nearby. No broken-down vehicle, no lights in the distance. Just this man standing in the freezing darkness, waving for help. I should have kept driving. Every safety protocol says keep driving. But the temperature was lethal, and I couldn't stomach the idea of reading about a frozen body found on this stretch of highway. I started slowing down. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly in my headlights. He looked normal enough. Maybe 30 years old, clean-cut, average build. His face was red from the cold, and he was shivering violently. I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped about 20 feet past him. He ran up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. The cold air that rushed in was shocking, even though my cab was only moderately warm. He climbed in quickly, pulling the door shut behind him. "Thank you," he said. His voice was steady, no panic or excessive gratitude. Just a simple thank you. "Oh my God, thank you so much. I thought I was going to die out there." I told him no problem and asked what happened. Where was his car? He explained that he'd been driving when his engine seized up about a mile back. He'd tried calling for help, but his phone was dead. He'd started walking, hoping to find a gas station or at least get to somewhere with cell service. He'd been out there for almost an hour. The story made sense. I asked if he wanted me to take him to the next town, and he said yes, that would be perfect. I put the truck back in gear and pulled onto the highway. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. He sat there warming his hands in front of the heater vents, occasionally rubbing his arms. I asked him his name, and he said it was David. Asked where he was headed, and he said Casper. We made small talk about the weather, about how dangerous it was to be stranded out here. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. His jacket was light, but it wasn't wet from snow. His shoes had no ice on them. And most troubling, he wasn't shivering anymore. He'd stopped almost immediately after getting in the truck. After supposedly being outside in 20 below weather for an hour, he'd warmed up in less than 5 minutes. I glanced over at him. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, his hands folded in his lap. His posture was too relaxed, too comfortable. People who've just been through a near-death experience don't sit like that. They're agitated, grateful, emotional. He looked like someone waiting for a bus. I tried to shake off my unease and focus on driving. Maybe he was in shock. Maybe he was just the type to internalize stress. I turned my attention back to the road. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, but getting stronger. It was a chemical smell, sharp and unpleasant. Like cleaning products mixed with something organic. Something rotten. I looked at him again. "David," I called him. "You feeling okay?" He didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He just kept staring ahead, hands folded, that neutral expression on his face. "David," I said louder. "You all right?" He turned his head toward me then, and my blood went cold. His eyes were wrong. The pupils were too large, completely dilated, making his eyes look almost entirely black. And he wasn't blinking. Not at all. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was still calm, still normal, but hearing it come out of that face with those eyes made every instinct scream danger. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and focused on the road. My mind was racing. What was wrong with this guy? Was he on drugs? Having some kind of medical episode? Or was something else happening here, something I couldn't explain? We drove in silence for another 10 miles. I kept checking my mirrors, hoping to see the lights of the next town appearing. But there was nothing. Just darkness and snow and empty highway stretching endlessly ahead. Then David spoke again. "You should pull over," he said. "I'm not pulling over," I replied. "We'll be in the next town in about 20 minutes. You should pull over now." His voice hadn't changed in tone or volume, but there was something final about the way he said it. A certainty that made my stomach drop. "I'm not pulling over," I repeated. He turned to face me fully, those black eyes fixed on mine. "You're going to pull over," he said, "and you're going to open the back of your trailer." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had no idea what he was talking about, but every fiber of my being knew I couldn't let that happen. "I'm not opening anything," I said, "and you need to get out of my truck." He smiled then. It was the worst smile I've ever seen. Too wide. Too many teeth showing. I looked back at the road and made a split-second decision. There was an emergency vehicle turnaround coming up in about a quarter mile. If I could get to it, I could use it to turn around and head back toward the last town we'd passed. Maybe find a police station. Maybe just get away from wherever this was going. I started to slow down, making it look like I was considering pulling over. David seemed satisfied. He turned back to face forward, that horrible smile still on his face. As soon as I reached the turnaround, I cranked the wheel hard. The truck lurched as I maneuvered through the U-turn, my trailer swinging wide. David grabbed the door handle to steady himself. "What are you doing?" he asked. The calmness was gone from his voice now. "Getting you out of my truck," I said. I completed the turn and started accelerating back the way we'd come. David's expression changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and angry. He reached for the door handle and pulled it. The door flew open, letting in a blast of freezing air. Then he jumped. At 50 miles per hour, he opened the door and threw himself out of my truck. I slammed on the brakes, the trailer fishtailing slightly on the icy road. When I finally stopped, I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Then I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. I walked back along the shoulder, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I expected to find a body. At that speed, on this terrain, nobody survives that kind of fall. But there was nothing. No body. No blood. No drag marks in the snow. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood on that empty highway for 5 minutes, searching. The wind howled around me, and the cold bit into my exposed skin. Finally, I gave up and returned to my truck. Story 3, The Detour. There's a stretch of Interstate 40 in New Mexico that I won't drive anymore. I don't care what the dispatcher says. I don't care how much they offer to pay me. I'll take the long way around, add 6 hours to my route, burn extra fuel. Anything to avoid that particular section of highway. It happened in October, 3 years ago. I was hauling furniture from Albuquerque to Amarillo, a routine run I'd made dozens of times before. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and I was making good time. Everything was normal until I saw the detour sign. It was one of those official orange signs with black letters. Road work ahead. Detour next exit. I didn't think much of it. Construction is constant out there. You get used to following detours through small towns and back roads. I took the exit and followed the signs. They led me off the interstate and onto a two-lane state highway heading north. The road was in decent condition, smooth asphalt with fresh yellow lines. More detour signs appeared every few miles, guiding me forward. Turn right. Continue straight. Follow detour. After about 30 minutes, I started feeling uneasy. The signs kept directing me further away from the interstate, deeper into empty desert country. I hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving the highway. No cars, no trucks, nothing. Just endless stretches of sand, scrub brush, and distant mesas under a gray afternoon sky. I checked my GPS. According to the map, I was heading in the wrong direction, moving northwest instead of east. But the detour signs were official-looking, professionally made. I figured the GPS just hadn't updated with the construction routes yet. Another 20 minutes passed. The landscape grew more desolate. The road began to deteriorate, the smooth asphalt giving way to rougher pavement with cracks and potholes. I had to slow down to keep from damaging my truck. The detour signs kept appearing though, always pointing forward. Then I noticed something strange. The signs were changing. Not the directions, but the signs themselves. They looked older, faded. The orange was less bright, the black letters worn and peeling. Some of them were riddled with bullet holes, like someone had used them for target practice years ago. I started thinking about turning around. This didn't feel right anymore. But the road was narrow, barely wide enough for my truck and trailer. There was nowhere to safely turn around, no wide spots or intersections. I had no choice but to keep going forward and hoped the detour led back to civilization soon. The sun was getting lower in the sky. In another hour, it would be dark, and I definitely didn't want to be out here in the dark. I pressed the accelerator a little harder, pushing my speed despite the rough road. That's when I saw the town. It appeared suddenly as I crested a small hill. A collection of buildings spread across a shallow valley, maybe 40 or 50 structures total. There was a main street with storefronts, side streets with houses, even what looked like a church with a steeple. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and I could see lights in some of the windows even though it wasn't quite dusk yet. Relief flooded through me. Civilization. People. I could ask for directions, figure out where this deeder was supposed to reconnect with the interstate. Maybe grab some food and coffee. I drove down the hill toward the town. As I got closer, I noticed more details. The buildings were old, probably from the 50s or 60s. The architecture had that mid-century desert town feel, all flat roofs and big windows and faded paint. Many of the structures looked abandoned, windows broken or boarded up, but some clearly weren't. Those lights in the windows were real, and that smoke from the chimneys meant people lived here. I noticed a gas station on the left side of the street. It looked operational, or at least not completely abandoned. The pumps were old-fashioned, the kind with analog numbers that flip over mechanically, but there was a light on inside the small building, and a sign in the window that said open. I pulled into the gas station and parked. The lot was empty except for an old pickup truck sitting near the building, covered in dust and missing its rear bumper. I set my brake and climbed down from the cab. The silence hit me immediately. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic sounds. Just absolute, total silence. It was unnatural, oppressive. Even in the middle of the desert, you hear something. Wind through brush. Insects. Something. But here, there was nothing. I walked toward the gas station building. Through the window, I could see the interior. Shelves stocked with products. A counter with an old cash register. A rotating rack of sunglasses. But no person. No attendant behind the counter. I pushed open the door. A bell should have rung, but it didn't. The clapper was missing. Hello? I called out. Anyone here? My voice sounded flat in the silence, like the air was swallowing it. No echo, no resonance. Just dead sound. I walked to the counter and looked around. There was a newspaper lying there, folded open to the classifieds. I picked it up and checked the date. September 14th, 1967. My hands started shaking. This had to be a prop, something left over from a movie set or a themed attraction. But the paper felt real, old and brittle. And when I looked closer at the ads, they were legitimate. Phone numbers with old exchange names. Addresses with just street names and town names, no zip codes. Prices that made sense for 1967. I dropped the paper and backed toward the door. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I needed to get back in my truck and leave, find my way back to the interstate, get away from this place. But when I stepped outside, I saw them. People were standing in the street now. Maybe a dozen of them, scattered along the main road, all facing my direction. They were too far away for me to see their faces clearly, but something about the way they stood was off. Too still, too rigid. As I got closer, I could see them more clearly, and my stomach twisted with fear. They were all wearing old clothes, styles from the 60s. The women in conservative dresses and styled hair. The men in slacks and button-up shirts. But their faces were wrong. Not deformed or monstrous, just wrong. Their expressions were blank, emotionless. And their eyes didn't move. They stared straight ahead as I drove past, not tracking my truck, not following my movement. Just staring at the space where I'd been standing outside the gas station. I accelerated through the town as fast as I dared, my trailer swaying slightly behind me. More people appeared on the side streets, all of them standing still, all of them staring. Some of them were in their yards. Some stood in doorways. One woman stood in the middle of an intersection, arms at her sides, face pointed toward the sky. I reached the end of town and kept driving. The road continued into the desert, rougher now, barely maintained. I didn't care. I just needed distance between me and that place. My heart was hammering, and my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. After about 15 minutes, I crested another hill and saw it in my rearview mirror. The town was gone. Not fading into the distance, but actually gone. Where the valley and buildings should have been, there was just empty desert, like it had never existed at all. I drove for another hour before finding a paved road. I never take that exit. I ran out of fuel once in Texas. completely bone dry, which shouldn't have happened because I'm religious about checking my gauges. I've been driving for 14 years, and I've never let my tank get below a quarter full. But on this particular night, somewhere between Odessa and Fort Stockton, my engine sputtered and died. I was confused at first. The gauge showed half a tank when I'd checked it 20 minutes earlier. I coasted onto the shoulder and looked at it again. Now it read empty. The needle was buried below the E. I tried the engine again, but it wouldn't turn over. Just clicked and wheezed. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down to check the tanks. I have 2 saddle tanks, one on each side of the truck. I unscrewed the caps and shined my light inside. Both were bone dry. Not a drop of diesel. Impossible, but true. I stood there on the dark shoulder of Highway 285, trying to figure out what had happened. A leak would have left a trail. I would have smelled it, but there was no fuel smell, no wet spots under the truck, nothing. The fuel had simply vanished. I pulled out my phone to call for help. No signal. I tried for 10 minutes, walking up and down the shoulder, holding the phone up at different angles. Nothing. Not even one bar. The night was quiet except for the wind. No traffic was passing. I'd seen maybe 3 cars in the last hour, and now there was nothing. Just me, my dead truck, and miles of empty desert in every direction. I decided to walk. I had emergency supplies in the cab, including water and a good flashlight. According to my last mile marker, there was a small town about 8 miles ahead. I could make that in a few hours, get help, come back with fuel. I locked up the truck and started walking. The highway was straight and flat, disappearing into darkness ahead and behind. My flashlight beam showed cracked asphalt and bits of trash along the shoulder. The desert stretched out on both sides, invisible in the dark but present in that way empty space feels present. After walking for maybe 40 minutes, I saw lights ahead. Not the scattered lights of a town, but a single bright glow just off the highway. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a building with a tall sign. A gas station. Relief washed over me. I wouldn't have to walk all the way to town after all. I could get fuel here, maybe even get a ride back to my truck. I picked up my pace. The gas station was old, but looked operational. The sign said diesel in red neon letters. There were 4 pumps under a concrete canopy, and a small building with big windows that glowed with fluorescent light. A single car was parked near the building, an older sedan covered in road dust. I walked under the canopy toward the building. Through the windows, I could see a man behind the counter. He was watching a small television, the flickering blue light reflecting off his face. I pushed open the door. The man looked up as I entered. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a faded work shirt with a name patch that said Earl. "Help you?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he smoked too much. I explained my situation. Ran out of fuel a few miles back. Needed to buy a few gallons in a can, maybe get a ride to my truck. He listened without much expression, then nodded slowly. "I can sell you fuel," he said. "Don't usually give rides, but I suppose I could make an exception. Cost you though." I said that was fine and asked how much. He named a price that was high, but not outrageous given the circumstances. I agreed, and he grabbed a 5-gallon can from behind the counter. "Come on out," he said. I followed him outside to the pumps. He started filling the can with diesel while I looked around. The station was definitely old. The pumps were ancient, mechanical models from the 80s at least. The concrete was cracked and stained, but everything seemed functional, just dated. "You get much business out here?" I asked, making conversation. "Enough," he said without looking at me. "People break down. People run out of fuel. People get lost. They all end up here eventually." Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. I watched him finish filling the can, then follow him back inside to pay. He set the can on the counter and rang up the sale on an old mechanical register. The kind that goes ding when the drawer pops open. I handed him my credit card. He looked at it for a moment, then shook his head. "Cash only," he said. I checked my wallet. I had about $60 in bills. I counted out the amount he'd asked for and handed it over. He took it slowly, examining each bill before putting it in the register drawer. "Your truck back that way?" he asked, pointing east down the highway. "Yeah, about 8 miles, I think." "Get in," he said. "I'll drive you." We went outside to his car, the dusty sedan I'd noticed earlier. Up close, it looked even older than I'd thought. A late 70s model, all boxy lines and chrome trim. He put the fuel can in the trunk, and I climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled like cigarettes and old coffee. The seats were vinyl, cracked and patched with duct tape. There was no radio, just an empty rectangular hole in the dash where one should have been. The dashboard was simple, analog gauges with no electronic displays. He started the engine, which turned over with a heavy, rattling sound. We pulled out of the station and headed east on the highway. His headlights were dim, barely cutting through the darkness. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a signal. Still nothing. I looked at the time display. It said 11:47 p.m. I'd left my truck around 10:30, walked for maybe 40 minutes, spent another 15 or 20 at the station. The time was right. Earl drove slowly, maybe 50 miles per hour. His hands gripped the steering wheel in a rigid 10-2 position, and he stared straight ahead without blinking much. I tried to make conversation, asked him how long he'd owned the station. He said a long time. Asked if he lived nearby. He said close enough. His short answers discouraged more questions, so I went back to watching out the window. We should have been approaching my truck soon. I'd walked for 40 minutes, and we'd been driving for at least 10. But I didn't see it yet. After another 5 minutes, I started to worry. We should have definitely reached it by now. I leaned forward, scanning the shoulder ahead in the weak headlight glow. No truck. No sign of it anywhere. Should be coming up here soon, I said. Earl didn't respond. He just kept driving at that same steady 50 miles per hour, hands locked on the wheel, eyes forward. I think we might have passed it, I said, louder this time. Can you turn around? He still didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He just kept driving. Hey, I said sharply. Did you hear me? We need to turn around. Nothing. It was like I wasn't even there. He stared ahead with that blank expression, hands rigid on the wheel, driving steadily through the darkness. Panic started rising in my chest. I reached for the door handle, thinking I'd just get out, walk back, find my truck on my own. But when I pulled the handle, nothing happened. The door didn't open. I tried again, pulling harder. It wouldn't budge. Stop the car, I said. Let me out. Earl didn't react. We kept driving. I looked at the door lock. It was the old kind, a little knob you pull up. I grabbed it and pulled. It wouldn't move. Stuck fast, like it was welded in place. Stop the fucking car. I shouted. Still nothing. Earl's expression never changed. He might as well have been a mannequin. I considered reaching over and grabbing the wheel, forcing him to stop. But something told me that was a bad idea. Something about this whole situation was deeply wrong. And I didn't know what would happen if I broke whatever strange rules were operating here. I turned to look out the rear window, hoping to see my truck's lights receding behind us. Instead, I saw the gas station. We were approaching it from the west. The same gas station we'd left from, with its bright lights and diesel sign glowing in the darkness. Earl pulled into the station and parked in the exact same spot where his car had been before. He turned off the engine and sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I tried the door again. This time it opened easily. I practically fell out of the car, stumbling onto the concrete. Earl got out on his side, walked to the trunk, and removed the fuel can. He carried it into the building without looking at me. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. We'd driven back to where we started. But how? We'd been heading east the entire time. We never turned around. The road had been straight. I walked into the building. Earl was behind the counter again, watching his television like nothing had happened. The fuel can sat on the counter where he'd placed it before. What the hell just happened? I asked. My voice was shaking. He looked at me with those tired eyes. Cost you, he said. What? A ride. Cost you. You already charged me. I gave you $60. He shook his head slowly. That was for fuel. Ride costs extra. I felt like I was losing my mind. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I checked my wallet. The $60 was still gone, but there were now three $20 bills I didn't remember having. I counted them twice to be sure. $60, exactly the amount I'd paid him. How much for the ride? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. $60, he said. I stared at him. He stared back, patient and emotionless. I looked at the door, considered just taking the fuel can and running. But I had a feeling that wouldn't work. That somehow I'd end up right back here, standing in front of this counter. I took out the $60 and placed it on the counter. He picked up the bills, examined them, and put them in his register. Your truck back that way? He asked, pointing east. Yeah, I heard myself say. Get in, he said. I'll drive you. We went through the whole thing again. The car ride, the silence, driving past where my truck should have been. Ending up back at the station. Earl asking for $60 for the ride. Me discovering I had exactly $60 in my wallet again. We did this 5 more times. Each time, I tried something different. I tried grabbing the wheel. I tried jumping out while the car was moving. I tried refusing to get in the car. Nothing worked. Each attempt ended the same way, with us back at the station and Earl asking for $60. On the 6th cycle, something changed. As Earl counted the money, his hand paused. He looked up at me, and for the first time, his expression shifted. Something like recognition flickered across his face. You're learning, he said quietly. Learning what? That you can't leave, he said. Not until you pay what you owe. I don't owe you anything, I said. I've paid you 6 times now. Not me, he said. The road. You owe the road. I don't understand. He leaned forward slightly. Your fuel didn't disappear, he said. You made a deal with the road. Maybe you don't remember making it, but you did. Everyone who ends up here did. And now the road wants payment. What kind of payment? Earl straightened up. That depends on what you promised. But until you figure it out and pay it, you'll keep coming back here. Some people figure it out quick. Others take longer. There's a man been cycling through here for 3 years now. I felt sick. What did I promise? How do I figure it out? Think back, he said. Think about what you were thinking when you got on the road today. What you wanted. What you were willing to give up to get it. I stood there, forcing myself to remember. I'd started the drive from Odessa that morning. I was behind schedule because of a delayed pickup. My dispatcher had been furious, threatening to pull me from the route. I remembered sitting in the truck before starting the engine, desperate and stressed, thinking I'd do anything to make up the time. Anything to get to Fort Stockton early, save my job, prove I was reliable. I'd do anything. I said it out loud without meaning to. Earl nodded. There it is, he said. The road heard you, and it gave you what you asked for. Look at your watch. I looked down at my wrist. My watch said 11:47 p.m. The same time it had said in the car. The same time it had said every cycle. I'd been stuck in the same moment for hours, maybe longer. Time stopped for you, Earl said. Or slowed down. Same difference. You'll get to Fort Stockton early now. Make your delivery, save your job. But the road wants its payment first. What payment? I shouted. Just tell me what I owe. Earl reached under the counter and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He set them in front of me. Write down the thing you love most, he said. The thing you'd never want to lose. Write it down and leave it here. That's the payment. I stared at the blank paper. My mind raced through everything important in my life. My daughter back in Oklahoma. My mother. My best friend since childhood. My health. My memories. I can't, I whispered. Then you'll keep cycling, Earl said. Forever, probably. Or until you go mad. That happens too. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I thought about my daughter, about never seeing her again. About my mother, about missing her last years. I thought about everything I stood to lose. Then I thought about something else. Something I loved that maybe I could live without. Something precious but not irreplaceable. I wrote it down. My ability to dream. I'd always had vivid dreams since childhood. Dreams I could remember in perfect detail. Dreams that felt as real as waking life. They were my escape, my private world. Losing them would hurt, but it wouldn't destroy me. Not like losing the people I loved. That'll do, he said. He folded the paper and put it in his register drawer. Now get out of here before the road changes its mind. I grabbed the fuel can and ran. Out the door, into the darkness, down the highway. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. When I finally stopped and looked back, the gas station was gone. Just empty highway and desert darkness. I found my truck exactly where I'd left it, though I'd run much further than 8 miles. The fuel can got me going, and I made it to Fort Stockton before dawn. My dispatcher was thrilled. I'd somehow made up all the lost time, and then some. But Earl was right. I haven't dreamed since that night. 3 years now. Every time I sleep, there's just darkness, just nothing, until I wake up. It's like that part of me got erased, cut out, and kept in Earl's register drawer as payment for a deal I don't fully remember making. And sometimes, late at night on empty highways, I see that gas station in the distance. The diesel sign glowing bright. Earl behind the counter waiting. I always drive past, never stopping, wondering who else is in there right now, cycling through rides that go nowhere, trying to figure out what the road wants from them.